Wonderful. Thank you and welcome. I'd like to introduce this year's Necronomicon Providence is going to be held on August 13th through 16th, 2026. It's a biennial, multifaceted exploration of the weird fiction literary genre, which combines elements of horror, science fiction, fantasy, and magic realism. The convention is part literary and academic conference, part fan festival, part community reunion of people from all around the world who were drawn to Providence, Rhode Island. Originally built around the works of local writer H.P. Lovecraft, the convention embraces the classical and contemporary, spanning creative writing, exposition, art, and gaming, and more. And it welcomes a diverse community from all over the world, from at least 20 countries. But under the current administration, Necronomicon has experienced quite a downturn in international visitors. These videos are a way to include our contemporaries and colleagues from all corners of the globe. So I give you Antipodean, why did I choose that word? I said it so many times this morning, sorry. Antipodean, weird and horror fiction, the voices of Australia and New Zealand with Lee Murray, Dries, Geneve, Flynn, Kaaron Warren, and Eugen Bacon. Welcome and thank you for your time today. Today, these highly decorated authors of New Zealand and Australia discuss the cultural, literary, and historical roots of weird and horror literature, their relationships to these traditions, and their observations on how these genres are evolving across their own work and that of their regional contemporaries. First, I'd like to acknowledge the countries where we're all tuning in from and how we occupy the unceded ancestral lands of a number of First Nations people across Australia, New Zealand, and Rhode Island, where Necronomicon is held on Narragansett and Wampanoag land. We acknowledge the traditional custodians of these lands and their elders past, present, and emerging. So if I could, I'd like to ask the panelists to introduce themselves. Could we start with Lee Murray, please?
E ngā iwi, e ngā mana, e ngā reo, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa, ko Lee Murray tōku ingoa, tēnā koutou katoa. Hello everyone, my name is Lee Murray and as Lauren said, I'm from Aotearoa, New Zealand. I'm a 5-time Bram Stoker Award winner, a Shirley Jackson Award winner. I have a New Zealand Prime Minister's Award for Literary Achievement in Fiction, and I am an officer of the New Zealand Order of Merit for speculative fiction.
Welcome, Lee. Thank you.
Thank you.
Aaron?
Good morning, and thank you so much for having us, Lauren, and everyone. My name is Aaron Dries, and I'm an author of long-form fiction, short fiction, novellas, the spectrum. Primarily horror seems to be where I call my home. It's the warm little nest that I like to snuggle into. I am based here in Canberra in Australia, where it is actually the most beautiful morning. It is a cold and crisp and beautiful sunny morning. The fog is burned off and it's absolutely gorgeous outside. I have written a number of novels and short stories. I'm also an artist and I've dabbled in a lot of film work as well. And I've been branching out recently into a lot of screenplays and stuff, which is a completely different kettle of fish. And I'm absolutely thrilled to be here with you all.
Thank you, Aaron. Wonderful to have you. Geneve Flynn.
Hi, I'm a speculative fiction author, editor, and poet, co-editor very proudly of Black Crane's Tales of Unquiet Women with Lee Murray. And that's the anthology that launched sort of a grassroots movement in Asian women's horror writing. I'm a 2-time Bram Stoker Award winner, Shirley Jackson Shadows and Aurealis Award winner, and also a winner of the Brave New Weird Award, which I guess gives me permission to be on this panel. And also a 2022 Queens and Writers Fellowship recipient. And very excitingly, I'm also now a Master of Philosophy student at UQ studying female Asian Gothic literature. So that's probably preempted the last question you have about our exciting news, but I couldn't wait.
Thrilling. So glad. Congratulations, Jen.
Thanks.
Kaaron, Warren.
Hello, yes, and hi everyone. Great to be here. Like Aaron, I'm in Canberra, so enjoying a glorious Canberra day. Aaron and I have done some adventures in Canberra ghost hunting. We've got quite a few haunted spaces in Canberra. So while it is the seat of government, the capital of our country, there's also lots of spooky places and spooky people here as well. So I'm a Shirley Jackson Award winner, and I have a short story shortlisted again this year, which we'll know the result by the time we see this one, which is very exciting. Really love to know that I'm still writing stories that feel relevant, I guess, and that's part of what our discussion, I think, for some of us will be the ongoing relevance of horror fiction and the importance of horror fiction.
Fantastic, Kaaron, and congratulations.
Thank you.
And now we have Eugen Bacon. Thank you.
Hi, yes, thank you. I am Eugen Bacon. I am speaking to you today from Melbourne and would like to acknowledge the First Nations, the first storytellers, and the traditional owners of the land I'm talking to you from. And I am also a daughter of the Wajita people of Tanzania, and now Australia is my home country. So I have been really blessed to be able to write Black speculative fiction. Basically, I write Afrocentric fiction that heroes Black people's stories, and it's really me trying to find my connection, my identity, writing stories as an African who is also Australian. I am a mother, a daughter, a sister, a peer, a friend, a scholar. And so I also teach. I write part-time, I teach part-time, and I have so many other projects in between. And I am really excited about my work, and I'm also really, I feel blessed that my work has received the recognition that it has. It doesn't always come naturally. And I was really blessed to receive the Kate Solstice Award for significant contribution to science fiction. And I also, I am an Otherwise Fellow. I've won the British Fantasy Award, the Locus Award, the Ignite Award, the British Science Fiction Fantasy Award. And some of these are works from edited works where I edited Afro-centered futurisms in our speculative fiction. So I invite other African authors to write about the futurisms that they integrate in their storytelling. And so these are some of the works that I'd love to share with you today. Thank you.
Very exciting, Eugen. Thank you so much, and so much to talk about. I am your moderator. I'm Lauren Elise Daniels, and currently I've been transitioning my name from LE to Lauren Elise, using my full name after a decade of publishing under the initials under some advice. But times are changing. And so I am a two-time Bram Stoker finalist, a three-time Australasian Shadows Award finalist, a Aurealis Ditmar and Shirley Jackson finalist as well for my fiction, my editing, and my poetry. I'm an MFA grad from Emerson College in Boston, and I've edited over 150 titles. Worked in publishing since 1992, where I started in Boston, and I've been living in Australia, a New Englander, Rhode Islander, living in Australia for now 26 years.
Wow.
It's really lovely to have you here, to be able to gather up for this conversation. So a big thank you to all of you for joining us today. So let's get stuck into it. The first question is, how do you personally define the aspects of weird and horror fiction as a focus snapshot or a broad kind of sweep? How do these genres amplify your intentions and your messaging for your own work, prose and poetry included? And maybe since you went last time, Eugen, we'll start with you, if that's all right.
Yes, fantastic. Thank you. I think people call anything weird fiction that they don't understand. If it doesn't sit cleanly within a category, if it's not horror, it's not science fiction, it's not fantasy, what is it? So when we look at writers like Kafka or Haruki Murakami or Kurt Vonnegut, whose works really, you can't put them anywhere. And usually when you think of surrealist fiction or slipstream fiction. So anything that defies that logic, anything that bends genres, which a lot of my work tends to do, because I hate to be confined into something. I'm really grateful if a reader approaches my work without asking, is it science fiction, is it horror, is it fantasy? And even sometimes my publishers have issues trying to look where shall we place it, in what award category, because the work is quite cross-genre. And so I embrace genre benders. And when you think of it, even writers like Stephen King are actually bending genre. So you're thinking, I am reading horror, and you read something like The Dome, but it transverses genres. There is science fiction there is horror. And so anything, even anything that might blend into the psychological, just anything that blends the genres, I think fits into weird fiction, anything that you can call the literary strange. Sometimes people call my work Afro-surrealist because it's Afrocentric, but it also breaches those boundaries. It's the kind of fiction where you're bending walls and the reader knows that you're bending walls, but you carry them in the journey where for that moment in time, they are transported and they feel part of the story and it's making sense for that moment in time. So that's my contribution.
Oh, I love it. Nonconformist, visionary. We're on a roll already. Kaaron, would you like to add to that?
Yeah, like I agree with you, Eugen. I'm not a big fan actually of the definitions because I do find them confining for myself, but also in the bigger picture as well. But really, I think thinking broadly and thinking in the microcosm, I think broadly, horror fiction is the stuff that doesn't flinch. I totally agree with the weird concept. It's what we don't know what it is. But with horror, it's the stuff that doesn't flinch. Not everybody wants to read it, or not everybody wants to write it. I've had people say to me, in fact, the other night, Aaron and I did a reading together, and one of the audience members came up and said that she loved hearing my story because it reminded her that she can go that far as well, that she doesn't need to stop at a certain point. She can go to the place that the story needs to go. It's not there to make people feel good, which I think is really important. We're not writing necessarily to make people feel good, more to make them to react and to wake up. And we're not giving easy solutions in horror or weird fiction, which I think is really important to me. We're not having tied up loose ends, and we're not having the feel good sort of ending. But I was thinking about this in the microcosm as well. I think both weird and horror fiction work in the microcosm. We take the close-up moments, and I think this is kind of what Eugen was touching on as well. We take these close-up moments of things, and if you think about what something looks like under the microscope, it turns into something completely different and bizarre and unsettling. It's not the same thing, and I think really that's what we do in the sort of fiction that we write.
Oh, I love that. You're making me think of portraits of ants and grasshoppers
Yes,
that really confront
yeah,
the viewer. Wonderful,
that's
Karen.
right. And transform and turn that little ant when you see that face up close, it's terrifying. And you do start, I mean, we've had movies about giant ants, obviously, and things like that. But it's that it's taking that oddness of what exists in reality and expanding it or looking even closer into it.
Wonderful. Genevieve?
Going off what Kaaron is saying, I think it is that sense of, like for me, weird fiction evokes that sense that you're a small part of something much bigger and stranger. I'm thinking of the collection, The Shadow Book of Ji-un, which is edited by Yi Izzy Yu and John Ubranscombe, which collates these, I think, accounts of the weird from old Chinese stories, and that sense of that there is so much to the world that we don't know, but also being part of an Asian diaspora, that understanding that the supernatural coexists with the natural world quite I've sort of tied myself in knots, but quite naturally, it is part of the everyday world. So that for me is what I think of when I think of weird fiction, that sense of dread and awe, but that sense that you're maybe a very small part of a very strange cosmos. And horror fiction is maybe a bigger umbrella. It's that the work that evokes a sense of dread or terror or revulsion, but may not always have that sense of mystery, because you can have horror that is to do with like splatterpunk and that type of thing, or thriller under those umbrellas that are more evoking that sense of the horror people do to each other. But then there is the weird, which I think, like Eugen was saying, can blend in a lot of other genres and other concepts to evoke that sense of the strange, if that makes sense.
Oh, absolutely. Oh, I love it. Aaron, would you like to chime in as well?
I'm just reflecting on what everyone's saying, and I'm thinking, have you ever had a photo taken of you? Maybe perhaps there's a bunch of you in a group, and you see the photograph afterwards, and you look at it and you're like, who is that person? That is not me. What is that facial expression? That doesn't even look like me. What possessed me to pull that weird face for just that infinitesimal second where that camera shutter went click? I think, and I think it's quite a startling thing to acknowledge that we just exist in the weird all the time, and really weirdness is life, and that we may think that we have some control over our perception of what that night might have looked like, but the evidence of those slivers they seem to turn up suggest otherwise. And so I think that to me, I was just thinking about just that sense of disembodied realization that we exist in the weird. And I love bringing that into a point of realization in a certain type of weird fiction, which is a sense of the excuse me, of the normal in which the weird intrudes into it, as opposed to also other weird stories that exist and thrive weirdness within weirdness, where you know and acknowledge that the world is strange and therefore kind of beautiful and awe-inspiring. I think that there's an element of awe to the weirdness. And I think that it's like a door, and sometimes the door is open narrowly and a bit of weird light comes through, and sometimes it's broad and but I just don't think it needs to be prescriptive in any sort of way. When it comes to cosmic fiction, I don't necessarily think that you have to have tentacles in it to be for something to be kind of Lovecraftian. Or if we're going to talk about transgressive fiction, that it necessarily has to be extreme. Like I don't want to find myself prescribing to something unnecessarily and putting myself in a box. But I just think that the with every day that goes by, I'm acknowledging that things are strange, and thank goodness I'm not alone. And I think I'm trying to play with a lot of those thoughts when I'm writing.
Oh, wow. The normality, the weirdness encroaching on the normality. And we love tentacles, but we don't need them. That's fantastic. And you're making me think of the Lovecraft short story, The Outsider, which is very subtle and very creepy and philosophical as well. We're hitting some wonderful terrain here already. Lee, would you like to interject?
Yeah, and I got to come last now after that. So that's me. I actually, Aaron, I think I have that photo of the two of us looking totally weird on a panel. I have it. I have exactly the two of us looking. Oh. I've got that photo. I'll bring it up sometime. Yeah, look. I think I need to echo everything that everyone said, because I think I agree with all of it. I think that for me, there's also that, as well as that awe, there's also this element of whimsy in the weird and the uncanny. And I think for us here in New Zealand, particularly with our Maori puroko, our stories, there is this magical realism, this understanding, this acceptance that the uncanny is just part of our everyday, we step with it, we walk with it. And the Maori have a term, they use the term tupua, which means an uncanny thing, and they're just everywhere. And it's the log that doesn't sink. It's the mist that sits in the valley and doesn't burn off, as Aaron mentioned earlier. And it's the flutes that are playing in the background in the forest, those things that we just live with all of the time. So I think that sort of incorporates some of the things that everyone's saying. For myself, as a sort of Asian diaspora person living in Aotearoa, is born here, I also deal with that sense of not belonging, of not fitting in. So a lot of my own work, and I think this sort of echoes what Eugen was saying about, you can't put it anywhere, because I can't be put anywhere. I don't fit here anywhere. And so a lot of my own work, which I think was part of the question, sort of how do you fit it into your work and interpret that. And I think it's because I sort of look at the sort of intersection of culture and context, and that landscape. And so I think I draw on those aspects where those things blend, where there's a sort of what's the Venn diagram, isn't it? It's that little bit that, no one's really looking at. And that's kind of where I sit, and I don't belong in either group, but I'm sort of over here. And I think that's also where weird is, and that's, I think, why I feel at home. We're a bit weird, and I'm okay with that, and you're okay with that. And I think that's part of it too. It's the weird welcomes the weird, like, misery loves company or something. And I think that there's also, for me, it's the weird and the horror is also the community, because where there's an acceptance of that, a little bit just like magical realism is, oh, okay, I'll go past this stand of trees and it'll be Saturday again, and I can have the weekend again. And it's just that whole understanding that those things are just part of our lived experience. So I think that's how I would define it myself, which is, I wish I could have a nice succinct sentence, but I don't.
Oh, it's gorgeous. That was a gorgeous landscape. I was walking it with you, honestly. And we are the weirdos, mister, is all I have to say to that. And I'm going to ask you to go first on our next question, because I know what it's like to have to follow all of this insight and wisdom. So which overseas traditional Western writers, poets, artists first appeal? This is kind of how Necronomicon, the convention, started. So what stood out for you? It's just a little foundational reference to the roots of the convention. I mean, for me, I think there's always the witchy poetry of Emily Dickinson, or of course Shirley Jackson and Poe. And then I think there was a story called The Night Face Up by Julio Cortázar, which I love to mention in this circle. A lot of people perk up when they remember that. It was part of our high school readings, and also Young Goodman Brown by Nathaniel Hawthorne, that kind of vibe. So I'd like to throw that open to you firstly. What kind of authors come to mind? What pieces? What do you hear in that as influential for you?
Yeah, that's an interesting one, because I'm stuck out here on the end of the world, and New Zealand sort of, our curriculum coming through school is all based on what the British were offering. We're a Commonwealth country down here, so I read Macbeth, those kinds of things in school. The thing that I want to just mention, and I probably have said this in other panels, but the first thing that really spoke to me, and I read voraciously. I think Gone with the Wind was, I'm going to be a writer. I think I read it when I was 11 or 12. I think I'll be a writer. But the first thing I ever saw myself in was John Wyndham's The Chrysalids. And it's 1953. I think he wrote it was just before or just after the Day of the Triffids. And I think those have dark elements. There's the monstrous in them. And in that particular story, and it's 1953, so I'm probably not spoiling the story too much for people. In that story, it's about an apocalypse in which the mutant people, the monstrous, were ejected and sent into the forest or killed. And a group of telepathic teens lives outside that, and they don't belong. And one part of the story is, if you can make it, you could get on this ship and go to New Zealand. which was the sanctuary for the monstrous. And I thought, oh my God, that's why I was born here, because I'm one of these monstrous things that don't belong anywhere. So that was the dark story that spoke to me first. So there you go.
Oh, fantastic. Yeah, spoiler alert's fine at this stage, right? Aaron.
I'm thinking in terms of just some of those foundational voices, acknowledging that weird fiction has all of these kind of stages and evolutions, and there is the really true like originators of it as we think from an academic sense, and then there is this chasm of sort of weird, and then there's what we know of as the new weird, and I've kind of got like sources of inspiration and sparks and loves for all of them. When I was really younger and really getting into reading, there's a whole shelf of them. I was and still am such a Robert Bloch fan. And I think there was something about the broadness of Block that really appealed to me when I was younger, and I loved the intrusion of the weird on really domestic situations. These were not the stories of, often sometimes he would have like really kind of Lovecraftian stories. He was having conversations with Lovecraft, for example, who they knew. They knew each other, which was said in academic circles. But then I was much more interested and drawn into the intrusion of the weird upon marriages, upon scam artists, blackmailers, and things like that. And there was a particular story that haunted me. I read it when I was really young, and I really do think that weird fiction just lends itself to the short form so adroitly at times. And it was a short story of his called The Pin, and it's about the Grim Reaper, but the Grim Reaper is just one of a fleet of bored, overworked, depressed men who travel the countries to countries and often find themselves alone in hotel rooms or above convenience stores in dingy little rooms, depressed, crying, drinking to console themselves with a phone book in front of them and a pin, and just blindly just dropping names in the phone book. And that to me just was this incredible kind of merge of the utter mundane and something really, really weird and uncanny fusing together in a way that really upset me. So that really, really kind of blew my mind when I was younger. But I also think that there were elements of weird in certainly like Daphne du Maurier. I think like the blue lenses and the birds. The birds is a very weird story. Again, something that's grounded in post-World War II recovery, and then it seems as though there's this environmental comeuppance that seems to be sweeping in like an awe-inspiring and completely impossible to defeat tidal wave. It's dread, and I think that there was the attraction to the feeling of dread that was the takeaway that I was taking from all these stories. But it was also in like, Ray Bradbury, who I was reading at the time. I remember The Skeleton, about the guy who becomes ultra aware of the fact that there's a skeleton inside his body and it sends him into existential crisis. So a lot of these voices, when I was younger, those kind of foundational stuff of that first waves up until like about the 1950s, early 1960s, those were some of the voices that really attracted me. Charles Beaumont, or I could go on for days.
Oh, I love it. And a reading list is what we're hoping for in the audience. Genevieve, would you like to add your titles?
My foundational work is probably a little bit difficult for people to source outside of Malaysia. I remember reading the Lao Fushi comics, the Old Man Q comics, and it was these three guys that were kind of friends that had everyday adventures, but every now and again there would be a supernatural encounter, and it would be out of the blue. It wouldn't seem to fit with the overarching narrative of the comics, but either they were terrified of it or they dealt with it in a very comical or very practical everyday manner. And that sense of there is a very strange world beyond what I know as this little kid. That really stuck with me. But in terms of maybe text that might be a little bit more accessible for other people to find, I would have to say Stephen King. Just some of this, as Aaron was saying, short fiction, I think really fits weird very well. He had the Langoliers, where it's, you know, a group of people in a plane, and all of a sudden these weird spheres are coming through destroying things, or The Mist, where it's like, what is happening, why? But there is no explanation. It's just these strange things intrude into normal life. So that's probably something that stuck with me. And Peter Straub and Richard Matheson, I was reading a lot of their fiction at the time as well. But in terms of more recent, I would have to say The Evolutionists by Rena Mason. That sense of what is happening in this story, what is actually happening for this character, but it's also exploring themes of being an outsider, and it's like, how outside is this character? I don't want to spoil it because it turns out she's very, very much outside of humanity. So that kind of idea that you can go that far with fiction, and you can be as strange and weird as your imagination goes, I think that was really striking for me.
Fantastic. Yeah, hat tip to Rena. Wonderful. Genevieve. Kaaron?
Yeah, I love this, and I love the reading list we've got so far. I'm quite wide and varied already, so I'm going to vary it just a little bit more. My early influential reading was quite a long time ago. I published my first short story in 1993, and I'd been writing for, you know, at least 10 years before that, finding my own voice, figuring out what sort of writer I was going to be, and really not sure at that point. I knew that I was going to be writing ghost stories and creepy things, etc., but I wasn't sure if I was going to be allowed to do that. So the books that I sought out, and I had access to an amazing library. The City of Sydney Library was this incredible library. I also had access to lots of secondhand shops and that sort of thing. And so I was buying up all sorts of stories and books that you would now consider to be the weird, but at the time were part of literature. I was definitely looking for the books that were outside the traditional outlines of novels. I was wanting the stuff that was groundbreaking, I guess, and doing things differently, because that's what I wanted to do. I wanted to tell my stories differently. So people like Kathy Acker, William Burroughs, Alistair Gray, the Scottish writer who wrote Lanark, which I just adore, William Volman with his oh my gosh, You Bright and Risen Things, I think it's called. Incredible. I mean, and he writes incredible non-fiction too, just the most beautiful interview series, etc. Richard Brautigan, who I'm sure Lauren would know well. Brian Aldiss, I got a copy of his Brothers of the Head graphic novel, which is just the most astonishing thing. Absolutely amazing. William Golding, so Lord of the Flies, but everything he does in the most out of the box kind of a way. And he's someone I will reread to remind myself, you don't have to write in traditional ways. You can tell these stories in your own way. And Faye Weldon, the incredible British author Faye Weldon, and horror comics nonstop. Like, Gene, I was definitely into horror comics. I'd go to Trash and Treasure and get a big stack of the creepiest horror comics, all of which I realised retrospectively were very Lovecraftian. So then, and I just took a note then as people were talking to remind myself that it was the Alberto Manguel anthologies. There's Blackwater and White Ice. Like, I do, when I remember it, I had this moment where I go, oh my God, I remember when I found those books and read them and how utterly transformed. And I'm gonna go find it on my shelves and reread again now. Just these short snippets of incredibly fantastic literature. So that's my I could go on and on, as everyone said, but those are the ones that came to me that absolutely influenced who I am as a writer. And I now enjoy other work, but I think it's that early formative years that are the influential authors.
Oh, foundational. I love it. Thank you, Kaaron. And Eugen?
Yeah, this is a really interesting question, because one of the most influential writers who's really had an impact on my own writing journey is Toni Morrison. And people don't think of Toni Morrison as a speculative fiction writer because most of the works are published as literary works. But when you think of like Beloved or Songs of Solomon. Like the writing is literally strange. Some of it is horror. You could almost put it in the weird category. And what I really loved about Toni Morrison was that she wrote differently. Her most revolutionary and defining literary act was to write for Black readers about Black people, and she taught me that I could write myself into the text. Like the writing was so different. So that was one thing. Today, if you when I'm teaching writing and I want to talk to somebody about dialogue or about writing that really expresses itself, I direct them to Toni Morrison. So I would definitely say, don't prejudge the books. Just lift one Toni Morrison. And honestly, I read one. I started with Beloved. I went and bought all of Toni Morrison's books. I've read all of her fiction. Like it was so changing for me. But then I'd also like to talk about two other writers who are not as renowned, but their work is really different. One of these is Andrew Hook, who's a British writer of slipstream fiction. And what I love about his stories is that the predominant thrust of the story is really about the interplay of relationships and realism, but through a different eye. It's almost like a genre bleed, but he sees the world differently. Like literally, he's written stories like The Forest of Dead Children, where in all the stories, it's a collection involving children or a child in peril, and the peril comes from their parent, either intentionally or absent-mindedly. And I remember I interviewed Andrew and I asked him, like, seriously, you're a parent. How do you write a story like, Forest of the Dead Children, a collection like that? And he said, it's precisely because I'm a parent, because I can capture those intimate moments. And so I'm coming from a place of love, but also a place of frustration. And I see children differently because I love them intensely as a parent. So Andrew Hook, if you haven't read him, he's just released a collection called Somnambulant Hearts. So he's mostly a short story writer. He's written novels. I would refer you to his collections because they take you to, he has such a quirky gaze at the world. And then just one final one is Nuzo Ono. So Nuzo Ono is a British Nigerian writer, and I discovered her because I was reading Alice, and she had a story called Ogali, and she infuses African tradition, African horror, the supernatural into her writing, and like she writes simply but really powerfully, and it's African horror that yanks out your outrage. Like you feel anger, you feel fear. She takes you to this place that reaches your gut. And there are stories about appeasing the spirits, and she really works on that, the ancestral veneration, the afterworld coming back. And she goes to places where you wouldn't expect somebody to go. So one of her books is Where the Dead Brides Gather. And she's also released Futility by Titan. And so if you're looking for really different African horror that takes you to places where you're literally thinking she didn't go there, and she did. So that's those three authors. I'd say Toni Morrison, Andrew Hook, and Nuzo Ono. Just do a Google, look for their books, and they will take you to places.
Fantastic. She didn't go there, but she did. That's what we want.
Yeah, and I can tell you somebody else who goes there,
Yes.
and this time in Australian writing. And I'm looking at you, Kaaron. So I discovered Kaaron Warren through reading your novel Tide of Stone, and you're another person who goes there. Like literally, I was reading Kaaron's book and I was thinking, I can't believe this was published. Like and it takes you to such deep places. And you're talking about discovering your voice. You definitely have a voice. Like I've always really enjoyed reading your work, whether it's a short story or a novella like Bones Like Oil, or a novel. Like just if you're looking for Australian fiction that is more than gothic, that is more than horror, because it goes there. That's
Yes.
Kaaron Warren for you.
Yes. Oh, thank you.
Absolutely. And you've
Thank you.
transitioned us, Eugen, into this new terrain of talking about Australian and New Zealand. But Kaaron, did you want to say something?
Oh, I just wanted to say thank you, Eugen. I know both Lee and Aaron had a small involvement. Well, Lee a large involvement. She actually edited that novel, so we did have some discussions about how far we go. But yeah, there's a couple of scenes in there where I really had to push myself to go to that place because it needed to be as horrifying as it was. In fact, I'd forgotten one scene. There was a scene on a train that I had actually forgotten, and someone reminded me the other night. And I had to go look it up and went, oh, no wonder I forgot that. That's awful. Really awful. But yeah,
Wow.
thank you, Eugen. I really appreciate it.
Fantastic. And this is what we want to talk about next. Or let's talk about New Zealanders. Let's talk about Australian writers, creators, and what you recommend and what's happening now, your contemporaries, colleagues. And just for the sake of time, too, if your own work comes into this conversation, let it, please. Kaaron, do you want to start?
Yeah, so do you want us to do the own work thing or do you want us to talk about Australian
Maybe
authors?
start with the Australian and New Zealanders, and then if
Yeah.
you want to blend your work in there as well.
So the section that I'm sort of thinking about my own work is quite a big bit. So I'll just talk about the Australian authors. So first of all, we were talking about inspirational early inspirations. So some of those would be Robert Hood, Australian horror writer, short stories, novels. I would say he was one of my early. He goes there, Eugen. He's just a person who writes incredibly. Deeply about humanity, but also isn't afraid to look it hard in the eye and make the bad things happen. Lucy Sussex, a New Zealand writer, but has now lived in Australia for a lot of years. Another amazing, I remember finding her stories in anthologies and just being entranced by the magic that she wove on the page. Carmel Bird as well. And Lucy Sussex has just sent me Kleiser by Mary Fortune, which was a graphic novel written in like 1860 or something like that, which I haven't read yet, but I am going to get stuck into that one. And as for today, I mean, I think we're probably all going to be naming a lot of these writers. We could have had a panel here of about 30 people, I think. And what I really love about Australia and New Zealand writing right from the start and today as well is as Eugen has mentioned a number of times, we're genre blending. Like I think we are less confined. I think to a certain extent it's because we've had fewer opportunities. And so when an opportunity comes up, you write a story that fits that or you just blend it more because we've had fewer opportunities early on. But I'm sure the others are going to name these people as well. And I did write down so I don't miss anybody, but I have missed plenty of people. Angela Satter, J.S. Brookler, J. Ashley Smith, Matt Ty, Alan Baxter, and Pamela Jeffs, who I thought was going to be on our panel, but she's not here, which is unfortunate because she's amazing too. And of course, everybody here. And that's just literally off the top of my head. And what I love about the writing that's going on this side of the world, I think we all of us here and those names I've listed, distinctive voices. You could pick up a story by any one of those authors and know who wrote it. And I love that.
Solid voices, yes. Would someone else like to add to our list? Genevieve, you look ready.
Part of the question you sent was who's inspired you and maybe accelerated your development. I'd have to give a shout out to my Australia Horror Writers Association mentor, Deborah Shelton. Her work is incredible, but also her mentorship was very kind and insightful and still influences me today. I'd also say Lee Murray. Lee's looking down, but yeah, there are just people within the Australian community that have really shaped me as a writer, and I think so many people are putting a hand up, out to lift other people up. And that is, I think, something very special about our Australian horror community. But in terms of voices that I read that like Kaaron said, have really distinctive voices and powerful stories. Lisa L. Hannett, Jason Narung, and Grace Chan, Elaine Krie-Kang. These are all wonderful writers. And I think what's exciting, as well as everybody on the panel, is that we're kind of punching above our weight. We're seeing, if you're seeing, I think Lee, Eugen, Kaaron, you're all on current shortlists for editing and fiction. And you know, when we introduced ourselves, we all have really impressive bios. So I think Australian, Australasian writers, we're really representing and bringing those weird and distinct voices to the world and sharing some of our weirdness with everybody.
Sharing it round. I love it. Yes. Lee or Aaron, would you like to chime in here as well?
Okay, I've got again just a list of names. Some of them are those inspirations to me when I was younger and forming my identity as a reader, and that helped to form the identity that I would emerge as a writer in ways that I've never been able to articulate, but I'm very grateful for. I grew up on Paul Jennings. There is a really wonderful tradition of weird fiction for children, and I think it's something that we shouldn't lose, and it's something that we should be embracing more than we do, and also calling out as weird fiction. Paul Jennings is very, very weird, and these are stories where the weird intrudes on the lives of children, and children have a flexibility. They bend in a way that we sometimes forget how to. And so the responses to the weird is so joyous and has that whimsy that Lee was talking about too. And I think there's something really beautiful about that. And I don't want to lose it. And I keep trying to think about how to remember the child that I used to be. So that was really important to me. Another young adult author at the time when I was reading stuff when I was a kid was Victor Keller. His book Del Del really, really shook me up. I thought that was really terrifying. But then there were books for adult literary fiction by Australians, by authors like Sumner Locke Elliott, who's most famous for writing Careful He Might Hear You, but also wrote incredible weird fiction, books like Going, The Man Who Wasn't There, stuff that really kind of tapped into existential decay in an otherwise suburban setting really, really startled me. Early works by Gabriel Lord, like Fortress and Tooth and Claw, that was really inspirational to me as well. And also, queer voices like Christos Tsiolkas, who wrote books, who's known for writing books like The Slap, for example, but wrote really terrific books like The Jesus Man and Dead Europe, speaking about his history and the history of his family through an incredibly weird lens. That stuff was really important to me as well. Wake and Fright by Kenneth Cook, and also Picnic at Hanging Rock really blew my mind when I was young by Joan Linsley. That was a story that really kind of woke me up to the weirdness that exists in landscape, in mood, in atmosphere. So these were some of the Australian voices that really resonated with me at the time. But there was also weirdness and in other mediums as well, in music, in film, in art. And I'm thinking again of just those voices that really shook me up when I needed to be. I'm thinking of artists like Tracy Moffat, who is an Indigenous Australian artist, painter, and filmmaker who explores her own family, her storytelling, and her community with such color and vibrancy, and is not afraid to go there. I think she is a powerful force in the creative scene for many, many years. Or even just really, really foundational artists like Sydney Nolan, who embrace the weird in order to tell the absolute disturbing, Australia's disturbing past and its colonial past in particular. That stuff really blew my mind. And I think that these are some of the traditions, and it taps into what Kaaron said about not flinching, that we are seeing continuing here. And I think that that's something that we absolutely need to hold on to. For the love of God, stay brave.
Oh, yes. And I love that you moved into the territory of music and art as well. I mean, that's fantastic. The scenes here are so rich. Thank you, Aaron. Now, Lee, would you like to
Oh gosh, I want to say yes to all of those Australian names, all of whom I think all but a couple that I've read. I made a couple of notes. Victor.
Keller, I'll text it through to you.
Thank you, because I mostly know those names, but so I'm, as the only Kiwi on the panel, I'm just going to throw out some Kiwi names, obviously. Shout out for Aotearoa. I think in the early days, people like Morris G, again, he was writing for children, but Under the Mountain, some of his work has that, I don't know, that isolation, that sort of oddness to it. Catherine Mansfield, her short stories have that real, she calls it the savage spirit. And I totally agree with that, that sort of, that moment between, at dusk where everything has those shadows, and the atmosphere of her writing certainly brings the weird, I feel, the uncanny. Sargison wrote about some odd stuff, and Ronald Hugh Morrison, he wrote some really very strange Gothic type of work. The Scarecrow is one of his. Owen Marshall, Coming Home in the Dark, that was an older story, and it's just been made into a film by James Ashcroft. And it's just that sort of quirky, that unexpectedness of our Kiwi character, which I think is also an element of the weird. Paul Haynes, deceased now, but an incredible writer. I know Australian Shadows has the Paul Haynes award for long fiction, I believe it is. So you might have won that, Aaron, have you? I think. And Kaaron, beg your pardon, Kaaron. Of course, she's probably won it 20 times. I should have said. But he wrote this wonderful story, while actually quite harrowing, while he when he just after he contracted cancer, and it's called High Tide at Hotwater Beach. And Hotwater Beach is a beach in New Zealand where you just dig a hole and it just fills up with beautiful hot water, and you can sit in it, and it's like your own little spa pool. But he wrote this absolutely just weird story about burying himself up to the neck in the sand and waiting for the tide to come in, to take you away. And I was just, the horror of that, but also the weird. He just had this uncanny way of addressing it and using that landscape, that strangeness of New Zealand to do it. So definitely worth investigating his work. Modern stuff. So we have, look, I just need to say that New Zealand was really late to the party, publishing Maori stories, or puroko, in English. It's a very oral tradition, and I'm sure that's very similar to Eugen's experience, and possibly Genevieve in Malaysia. There's a lot of oral storytelling, and so New Zealand was really late to, I'm ashamed to say, but we were late to the party getting those Maori stories down on paper. And, and now there's this wonderful explosion of Maori storytellers. I think the last year's Ockham Awards was almost entirely Maori stories. And I'm still catching up on all of that reading, which is just super exciting. But I want to shout out, obviously, Watiia Hemara was the first Maori novelist in New Zealand. So he does some supernatural stuff. And The Whale Rider is a story about a young woman who is an ancestor to one of the whale spirits. So that has that, those magical realisms, the myth that are part of the everyday. And Watiia Hemara put out a book of Maori fables and stories retold with a writer called Whiti Heriaka, and she's also doing some wonderful work. I want to also point out the poets, because New Zealand poets are doing some really exciting things in weird. We've got Tim Jones, William Cook, and Tusiata Avia doing some really fantastic sort of odd sort of stuff in the poetry space, which is a wonderful space to practice and try those sorts of things. And there's, of course, very performative as well, which is a little bit more in line with that sort of Polynesian Maori tradition of oral storytelling. Also, Cassie Hart for Butcherbird, and Dan Vick-Grinnell and Dan Raybarts writes some fantastic dark stuff. And also some of our more mainstream writers, because we don't have any publishers of speculative really here in New Zealand. It's like do not apply. And so a lot of our mainstream writers are writing weird, but it's seen under the umbrella of literary. And so I would say Catherine Chidgey is writing that. Her Axeman Carnival is, about a talking crow, with an influencer sensibility. So that's kind of weird to me. And I suppose it is. And children's stories are all, as Aaron says, very much embedded in the weird. I mean, it's all whatever that word is, stories, three little pigs, and so we have a lot of that here in New Zealand. So I have a list that's just so long. So I'm going to stop. But read our stuff.
Fantastic.
My son grew up reading the Paul Jennings Dragon series. He loved them.
Yes.
I wanted to see what it was, just to tap into what is this that makes a child's eyes glow like that. Yeah. And I just wanted to mention a couple more writers. Kathleen Jennings, who is mostly identified for her illustrations because she's done work with Angela Slater, recently released Honey Eater, and oh my God, that book is amazing. It's one that you would call in the literary weird, like it's not really horror. It has ghosts, it has secrets, it has waterlogged country. It's dark and brooding, and it's one of the most beautiful texts that is equally dark that I've read. So that's something to look at. And also Ambeline Kwamulina, one of our First Nations writers, one of the books that I remember is Cutting Tela Crow, because it takes you to a place, and it's one of those books that utterly unsettles you, but it's worth looking at Ambeline Kwamulina's books as well.
Excellent. I think we're achieving our goals here. We are kind of running out of time, so I thought maybe we could have one last question about the future of the weird and the horror. There's so much going on in the world right now, and I wonder what your impressions are of where do you think things are going to focus next? So would anyone like to chime in there? Eugen?
I can jump in, very quickly. I think I like what people are doing with anthologies, because anthologies are a way of bringing everything together and inviting the lesser known authors to have their stories and introduce those to the world. And so just looking at what you've done with Silk and Sinew, I'm looking at Eugene and Lee, just bringing in like some of those Asian diaspora stories, the folklore, and bringing them together. I've also just edited and released Saudi Terrors, which is an anthology of Afrocentric stories set in the Saudiverse, which is an Afrocentric world. It's all very new, but just the reception of things like this. And I think if we continue writing the stories of culture, of tradition, stories that touch us deeply, stories of the everyday, relationship stories, family stories, because these are things that we have forgotten. The world is so rotten right now. We can still write that literary weird fiction, but write cautionary stories or write stories that remind people of how bad things can get, but how better things can be. Yeah.
I love it. Yes, and that foresight can be exercised in the weird and the horror as well, Eugen. Would someone else like to answer this question about what's coming? Genevieve?
I was just thinking that because like New Zealand and Australia, we are geographically isolated and we face particular challenges in terms of, like, for Australia, biosecurity is top of mind because we've recently had cases of the bird flu being found in Australia. I just wonder if that is going to be something that we're exploring, and also we're having concerns over the cost of living and the affordability. Are we going to see more stories like Parasite or Squid Game that are looking at that growing divide? And around food security, like Tender is the Flesh, which, is explored a very extreme solution to food insecurity. But I just wonder if that's going to be some of the things that we're exploring. But like Eugen, I'm excited that we're seeing a lot of diversity in what's being published and what's being talked about. Yeah, but those things are just kind of bubbling away in my mind. Things that are current, and whether or not people will start exploring, giving foresight, but also solutions to some of our challenges. Yeah.
Excellent. Yes. There's a lot there.
Yeah, and I think that's exactly right, Genevieve. I think also I think that looking at loneliness, because we are really, I mean, you think Australia is stuck out there, we're stuck out here too, and there are hardly any of us, like I can walk to the supermarket and not see anyone, so so I think that the loneliness, the isolation, and which is even more pronounced now that we're supposedly so connected, and I think that's part of it. And I also think New Zealand's well placed for dealing with eco horror and eco weird. We have our such strange things here that you don't see anywhere else. We've got our little kiwi and our tuatara, which sits in its own space in the taxonomy of animals. We're just weird here. And so I think there's a role for us there, and particularly around Maori and Polynesian approaches to conservation and dealing with those sorts of things. And I think the other thing that perhaps the Antipodean sensibility is good for, and that is that idea of the inner world, because we have had to be resilient and look inside ourselves. And so I think the sort of inner psychology of weird, which is weird, is something that I think we're well placed to address, because we already have some experience of that, of being those weirdos over there, on that part of the globe that usually is missed off, and I feel New Zealanders and Australians kind of get that. So we're sort of a little step ahead of what it is to be in those spaces. So perhaps that might be the place of the future, especially with, and also, that disconnect between, we're often well ahead, but we're also a little bit behind. Like I think we're in the old days, we had to wait for a ship to come to get whatever the fashion was from Paris, so we're a little bit slow in sort of getting a lot of things, but sometimes also we're right at the forefront because we're small, and we can move a little bit quicker than some of these bigger nations. So I think they're kind of well placed for some interesting developments in weird.
The hat tip to mental health, as well as a focus that's everywhere in horror at the moment. Now, Kaaron, I think you were ready to comment as well.
Mine's probably a little bit of a summing up to a certain extent, I suppose. Like everything that you've all said, I totally agree. This is the future of what we're looking at, the themes we're looking at. But it's all still about that microscope. It's all still about looking at the individual stories, the personal and private stories, and looking within, and telling those stories. Like big picture is one thing, but how does it affect this one person? I'm always concerned, well, all of us are, about domestic violence and how all of this leads to violence against women and against vulnerable people. That's the sort of thing that I'll be continuing to look at. But yeah, it's that personal, it's that putting that microscope onto the things that are happening in the big world. How do we tell the stories of the small things that are happening?
And that's a nice framing technique as well, Kaaron. Thank you. Aaron?
Look, in short, I find myself kind of asphyxiated by the thought of trying to predict which way the wind's going to blow, to the extent it makes me kind of go, oh, where the words won't come out of my fingers to some degree. So I agree with absolutely everything everyone has said. What Kaaron mentioned there was literally what was pinging around in my head, which is I think the only way out is to go in. And if we just continue to support one another to go in, these stories will persevere. And I love what Eugene said in regards to anthologies. I think that is a really fertile ground for us to continue to be really great readers. And I think that we must maintain being wonderful readers in order for us to continue to learn and to hone our craft. And I think that if we can uh, snowball the community and the readership out there along the way, great. And we're going to need that because there are many things stacked against us globally at the moment and domestically, both politically and in our homes. And I think that there has never been a more important time to be stronger together than now. I just can't predict what is coming next, but that is what makes this exciting.
Oh, while we have you, Aaron, would you like to tell us what's next for you or any announcements,
Um,
appearances? Where to find you?
yeah. I've got a story in Lovecraft's Brood, which is edited by Ellen Datlow, which is coming out soon. I've got a piece of weird fiction in that. Very, very weird. Very, very weird. And I've got a short story that I'm really happy with, called Nightbird, which is coming out in October. Kaaron gave me some mentorship on that one. That was really great. And that was a really great example of a story and how it evolves. You know, it started off in a reading that I gave it a shot and I took feedback from the audience. And then Kaaron was like, I think we need to have a talk about that when you can refine a couple of things, then going through the editorial process. So it was this just really lovely communal evolution to something that needed to be really personal and really real. It's called Nightbird. It's coming out in, I think, October. So that's coming, and I've got books out on submission and screenplay stuff that is always so frighteningly close that you wouldn't dare speculate that it could become a thing because that's how you break your heart. But along the way, I'm just trying to read. I'm trying to read as much as I possibly can and as widely as possible. So the list of names that have been coming down here, I've been jotting them down too because I'm wanting to continue to learn and to expand my horizons.
Thanks, Aaron. Eugen, what's coming up for you?
Yes, this The Ngafandile Whisperer, it's a novella set in the Sautiverse. It's about creatures of unreality. So that's as weird as it gets. And it's receiving really good reception. So if you'd like to have a look at it, it was shortlisted for the British Fantasy Awards. It won a gold medal in the Forward Indie, so I'm really excited. And then I have an ARC for Crimson Inquietus, which is also a novel. It's our inaugural novel set in the Sautiverse, and it's a story where your detective is it's a mystery where the person is not a detective but actually a scientist, and it has a serial killer, it has everything. It's one of those, as weird as it gets. Yeah, and I also have a collection of short stories coming out. It's not this one, but it will look like this, by Flame Tree. It's called Black Dingo, where in every story there's a cameo or a character or a secondary character of a dingo, and that it mirrors my being African Australian. Yeah, and you can find me at eugenebacon.com.
Thank you, Eugen. Kaaron?
I've got a couple of things coming out. I've got a novella coming out with Meerkat Press called Going to Summertime, which is about a group of four hairdressers who have their team bonding at a haunted cul-de-sac where they go in one side and they come out changed at the other end. So very much inspired by my little local hairdresser where I sit there and get my hair done and I can see it's glass all around and I can see the world. It's this sort of surreal world passing me by as I'm sitting there looking in the mirror and I hear voices and I see things passing by. So inspired by that. And I've also got a story called Uncle Hermit in Jonathan Strahan's Book of the Dead, which is about a Book of the Dead. I mean, I write about dead all the time. Like, how do I write a different story about the dead? So I wrote a story about funeral directors, a family of funeral directors, and what is in the back of the garden.
Very nice. Lee?
What have I got coming? Well, the last 12 weeks, I've been doing a creative writing course to try and sort of explore and experiment a little bit with my practice, because if you stand still, you don't move forward. So that's been really challenging, to be honest, because it was all professional writers in there, and poof, boy, some of them were good. So but I did manage to put down a few words, and I'm very slow, like I'm a 500 word a day girl. So I put down about 17,000 words in short stories, or, like still working on them. And so I'm really pleased about that, because, I don't have any trunk stories. So it's kind of nice to finally have some. But I have a story coming out in Ellen Datlow's All Hallows Eve. Just out is Stars and Sabres. It's Dread, Decay. Well, Eugen, you'll be able to tell me the story. It's the title. It's Dread, Decay, and something, or it starts with a D. There it is, that one there. So it's Dread something and something. We can't hear you. And then I have in Still Floating, edited by Tom Deedy, I have a essay called Deconstructing Dairy. Jonathan Mabry and Henry Hertz have an anthology of kaiju, monstrous kaiju stories coming out, and I have a very political kaiju tale in that one. So just mostly short stories. And I think my poetry collection with Karina Bissett, Oversight, Erasure Poetry, that is re-releasing. It's got stuck in production. So there were all sorts of horror stories there, weird and wonderful horror stories, but that should be out again soon in the next few weeks. So
excellent.
Yeah, that's
nicely.
me.
Thank you. And Genevieve.
As I mentioned before, my biggest news is that I will be starting a Master's of Philosophy, studying female Asian Gothic and Eastern narrative structure, which I'm very excited about. And I've probably bored a few people talking about my topic. I apologize. I have a few short stories coming out. Lauren and I will be in Shards of Gotham, New York City, through the Looking Glass, through, I can never pronounce it, Ruoden Books, edited by Jamal Hodge. Yes. So I've got one called Eating the God Fruit, which is about the Chinese belief that when you die, your soul splits, and what happens if we can harvest and, retain that part of that soul and keep that going. And of course, it all goes terribly wrong. And I have signed a contract for my debut short story collection. Cross fingers, it should be coming out late this year. So that's probably my biggest news.
Excellent. Yes, I'll be joining you in the Shards of Gotham with the 4 Stages of Fire, another ancestral tale from New York City set in the West Village. I'll also be joining Lee in Still Floating, Tom Deedy's anthology of essays. And also I'll be at Necronomicon. I'm on the panel called Line My Eyes and Call Me Pretty, Sublimation of the Feminine Through the Monstrous, with Nadia Bolkin, Kristen Dearborn, Jess Lewis, moderated by Anya Martin, with the Outer Dark podcast. So I look forward to seeing people there. And I want to thank everyone for joining us today. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you.